It was a very sad thing when I read about the passing of Clive Sinclair this morning. I was in the middle of making a video about my favourite 486, but have decided to shelve that one for a few days, clear the desk and take a brief look at the life of a great British tech pioneer, and then put something more appropriate on my desk and have a little play with and a poke around. Today I pay tribute to Sir Clive Sinclair, the 70s, and used both. So there you go, so Clive and Crispin treading over already very well-trodden ground, being that totally is full of tributes and histories of Sinclair related stuff. Here's just a very quick this was rundown of my first great things that idea of what he actually looked like. So back we travel through the mists of time to 1961 and the founding of Sinclair Radionics. And this company, I believe, eventually ended up concentrating on things like electronic calculators, the first of which they produced in 1971, and something which I have personal experience of, having been a child of the 70s and used both Sinclair and Commodore electronic calculators in my schooling, alongside arcane devices such as slide rules and trigonometry tables. That just goes to show how ancient I really am. So after a few career moves, the next company that Clive created was called Science of Cambridge in 1977, and this saw a gap in the market and opportunities with the advent of cheap microprocessors to release a kit computer. So one of the very early kit computers was this MK14 that sort of kicked off some ideas, eventually leading on to the ZX80, which is the first of the famous ZX series of computers that we're probably all familiar with. And the ZX80 was a monstrous success, being either bought in kit form or bought ready built, both for under £100, and making that kind of thing very accessible, possibly for the first time, certainly in the UK. Couple of company name changes and rebrands later. First of all, Sinclair Computers, quickly followed by Sinclair Research. The follow-up, the ZX81, followed much in the same vein as the ZX80, except it was even cheaper, so you could buy the kit form for £49.95 British pounds and complete build £69.96. So yeah, it was a big jump, and suddenly everybody could afford a computer, basically. At the same time as this was all going on, the BBC was looking for a computer to endorse to promote education in computer science, and there was a bit of a competition going on. I remember it well. I think there was Dragon Computers, a company from Wales, Acorn, and also Sinclair, were all fighting for this prestigious branding, but Acorn won out in the end, which went on to become the BBC Micro, so Sinclair had to look for other things to get into. So 1982, birth of a legend. Following all of the dust settling from the BBC, here we go with the most iconic of early 8-bit computers, certainly here in the UK. I believe it was sold in the US. There was some kind of deal with Timex, and it was sold under the Timex Sinclair brand. But here the Spectrum was just a mainstay of early bedroom computing. There were many people had C64s, but this was the homegrown equivalent, and was my first home computer. Well, it wasn't my first home computer, because to be honest, I wasn't interested in computers back then. I was interested in music and concentrating on playing my guitars and things like that. My sister had a later model, ZX Spectrum Plus 2, but yeah, so here we are, birth of a legend. So that was the success of Sinclair. Massively influential in the birth of home computing in the UK, possibly abroad, I'm not quite sure. I believe Spectrums are very popular in France, possibly other parts of Europe. I'm not quite sure how popular the Timex Sinclair was in the States, but alongside all these successes, there were some pretty big bombs to go with it. I believe the first of these was 1983. Sinclair tried to launch a pocket television. Basically nobody bought it, and it failed spectacularly. In 1984, Sinclair tried to move a little bit up market with a business-orientated machine called the Sinclair QL. It was late to market, it was buggy, and it blew stacks, and nobody bought that either. But then the most amazing of all of these machines was when Sinclair went into electric vehicles, and in 1983 he formed a separate company called Sinclair Vehicles Limited, and this created the Sinclair C5, and this is an amazing amazing machine. And I actually have personal memories of this because when I was at art college in the northeast of England in the early 80s, there was a guy who actually had one of these, and when we used to come home on the bus, you'd see him on the edge of the road, like sitting about 3 feet above the ground in his Sinclair C5. It was an amazing thing to see. The guy was a salty old sea dog too, because the town was a port town, and he looked like, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Captain Birdseye here in the UK. He's a salty old sea dog who advertises Birdseye fish products, big white beard, traditional sea captains or fisherman captains uniform. This is what this guy looked like, and he'd be sitting there in his C5 doing 25 miles an hour of what it is down the side of the road as the buses and the rest of the traffic roared past him within millimetres of taking his elbows off. He had this great big whip aerial with a little pennant flag on top of it, so you could see him. I don't know whether that was standard or whether he added that himself, but yeah, interesting contraption. And then of course with the fall of the computer industry in the UK, they got into some pretty serious financial hardship. Sinclair were offered to be bought up by Robert Maxwell in 85 when they went into receivership, but that fell through, and in the end most of the company was sold to Amstrad in 1986 for about £5 million, who continued making the Spectrum under Sinclair's name. I believe there's a Spectrum Plus 2 and a Spectrum Plus 3 that had built-in cassette recorders, so that you didn't need a separate one and didn't have to faff about with all of that tuning and stuff. So yeah, that was a potted history of the Sinclair's dabblings primarily in computers. So something was in my head when I was going through all of this. I remember seeing something about Clive Sinclair starting off a software business, and now that's probably primarily what I remember him from, because I was never really a Spectrum dude. I was into PCs, and I used to see this advert in my magazine for computer software for the PC. So I went digging through my pile of old computer magazines to see if I could find if this was true, because I couldn't find anything on the internet about it. But sure enough, here we are. Here's an advert that shows he did indeed go into the software business with a son, no less. So there you go, Clive and Crispin sporting strikingly similar and totally fashionable beards. And yeah, they sold games. I remember it well. And this was my first idea of what he actually looked like. So that advert was in PC Power February 1994, so I guess that's what he was up to there. Anyway, that's where we're going to wrap up the little potted history of some of the great things that Clive Sinclair did during his life, some of the mad ideas that he pursued, and now we'll take a look at one of his computers. So this is my 48K Spectrum Plus. It's a bit tatty, the box, but at least it is boxed and complete as far as I'm aware. Yeah, this box, a bit frayed on the edges. Potential there for one of my box restorations in the future, I think. Just slide out the polys from inside. And here we've got a card for technical support and registering the product. Let's see what goodies we've got in here. So this is a user guide tape that came with it. I have never actually played this. I don't know what's in it, but I imagine it's possibly a copy of that paper user guide in some kind of text format maybe. I'm not really sure. And the machine itself, the classic piece of what I presume Sir Clive was involved in the design of this thing. Certainly a massive improvement over what I remember the first one was like. A friend of mine used to have one with the rubber keys, which were bizarre, but this thing has something resembling a real keyboard, which is cool. Then there's the expansion edge connector, which all I've only ever really used it for was the Kempston joystick adapter, so that I could plug in a joystick, and more recently I've using it for my my SD storage solution. But I think you could have memory expansion, you could have printers and some various sound contraptions and a bunch of other things could plug into this. And a bunch of other inputs and outputs, headphones, microphone, power and video, which would have originally been RF, but this one's been modded for composite. Then we've got the power brick and the user guide, which is very, very focused on coding, so it's really not surprising that so many bedroom coders who went on to do great things got their start on this machine. And finally, I've got my SD card solution, which allows me to load games quickly. When I first got my Spectrum, I did mess about with tape drives, and it was nice and nostalgic to start with, but the novelty soon wore off. This is much better. Time to open her up and take a little peek inside. Now I'll take a little tour around the motherboard. So this first IC here is called the ULA, and it's a custom gate array that handles things like the screen, the beeper, and also is responsible for paging alternate ROM chips. Next up we have the famous Zilog Z80 8-bit processor, first released in 1976. The one in this 48K Spectrum runs at 3.5 MHz, and I believe that was a reasonable lick of speed back in the day. Next up, this IC is a 16K ROM chip, and it contains the basic interpreter. Now there's a bunch of memory management stuff going on in here. There's an address decoder and a row and column multiplexer. Down here we've got a bunch of memory chips. This is 16K of lower memory. And then over here we've got more RAM chips, and this is 32K of upper memory. Down here we've got the speaker stroke bleeper. We've got this big wire running across the board here, and this is the reset switch. And finally we've got what would have been the RAF modulator, but this one's got the composite mod kit in it. All back together now, and time to try it out in some games. So going to pop in Attic Attack, which is a favourite back in the day on my sister's Spectrum that I used to play, and going to give that a go now. And God, I just hope this machine still works. Yeah, I remember having hours of fun playing this, and keep on forgetting what's such a unique look, the images that you get on the Spectrum. I think it had an 8 colour palette, and there was something weird like it was divided into squares, and you could use 2 colours out of this palette of 8 within each square, so you ended up with this very distinctive imagery, which is pretty cool. Well, I guess that kind of wraps it up for this video. All that remains is to say thank you, Sir Clive, for all of the amazing inventions that you have entertained us with over the years. I hope you enjoyed this video, and hope you would consider giving it a thumbs up if you liked it, and possibly subscribing, and hopefully I'll see you on the channel again. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.